Hello everyone, so welcome to another podcast with Mr. Ashok Mishra, the author of Hinduism, a national bestseller, and now he has released his second book, Hinduism Challenges, that we'll be discussing in detail more about. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
From Vedic fire rituals to modern day ceremonies, Hinduism's journey is one of the continuity through change. This book traces its encounters with Jainism, Buddhism, and even Alexander's era. Today, we explore how Sanatan Dharma evolved yet remained timeless, simplified for the masses to understand.
Okay, so we are talking essentially about the second book, which is the challenges that Hinduism faced in pre-Christ era.
What triggered you to write this second volume after Hinduism, Ritual, Reason, and Beyond?
So, Aridhi, in short, my first book, as you are aware, is the history of evolution of Hinduism over a period of 5,000 to 6,000 years. Having finished that first book, I was constantly thinking, what were the various factors which changed a society starting from Indus Valley to Vedic society, which was completely focused on yajna, to a society which became idol worshippers, to modern Hinduism, where puja has been shortened and changed from its original shape into something entirely differently. And then I thought it is very important to write down how this evolution took place. What were the factors which made those changes? And when I started looking for it, I found that in the market there's practically no book. I have a fairly good library myself. Then I searched, and when I didn't find it, I decided to write this complete history, how it evolved in 3 different parts. And this is the first part, which deals with the very first changes in Rigvedic society that were brought about by its interaction with Buddhism, Jainism, both being organic ideologies, and with the arrival of Greeks led by Alexander. So, this volume deals with those things.
Okay, understood. As I know that you come from an entrepreneurial background and then you got into research about Hinduism, religion. So how do you connect to it on personal level, since this is not something that you were, always curious about? So how did you enter this space?
Well, short answer is this, that yes, I'm an engineer and I run a factory, and most of my working life I worked for private industries, a Japanese company and international consultancy based out of London. And currently I'm running my own factory for many, many years. But my first choice in life has always been reading. So ever since I remember, perhaps when I was 8 or even younger, I used to read continuously, and that habit has remained. So with passage of time, it became worse and worse. And now I spend almost 8 to 10 hours a day reading. My reading got more and more focused in last 10, 15 or even more years. And now it is almost 80% focused on Indology, on anthropology, on religions. So it was natural that I would migrate from there to this.
Okay, so reading was the root of you starting to write.
Is
Yeah.
and it continues.
Yes, yes.
It's my lifeline.
Why was Buddhism eventually absorbed while Jainism remained distinct?
Actually, it's a very complex question, and it will take a few hours to do justice with the subject. But I'll try and make it as short as possible. I think there were two main reasons. One was Hinduism itself. This is an intrinsic quality of Hinduism, that it never takes a confrontationalist approach to any ideology which is not in its own line. Instead of having confrontation, it starts examining the different ideologies it comes across. It starts investigating and it starts absorbing many of the things from the new ideology. This is how Hinduism has evolved. And this is precisely what it did to Buddhism. As we all know, it took things so far as to accept Gautam Buddha as one of the avatars. He has become a Hindu avatar. Now this is amazing. Gautam Buddha started Buddhism because he thought his ideology, his thinking was so different from Hinduism that he had to walk out of the house of Vedism and build his own house of Buddhism. And here is Hinduism, what it is doing. It is absorbing more and more ideas of Buddhism, the ahimsa, and so many other things, to the extent that it became almost one, and then it went and absorbed and adopted and accepted the founder of Buddhist religion as its own avatar. So this is one part. The second part, of course, is that Buddhism in India had to work very hard to keep its identity intact. As you know, Hinduism has so many different ideologies flowing into it. There are so many streams, from atheists, charvaks, dualists, to idol worshippers, to Arya Samajis. The divergence is difficult to grasp. Now, given this, it was becoming very difficult for Buddhists to keep their identity separate. And they kept working very hard to keep it separate. And the more they tried it, the more Hinduism became like them. And eventually, they lost their identity. There were, of course, there were multiple reasons. So, in short, in my opinion, these are the two reasons.
Okay. Was Adi Shankara responsible for uprooting Buddhism?
It is one of the topics which has been discussed ad nauseum. Not only among general public, but even among scholars. If you are asking for my personal view,
Yes.
then I don't think Adi Shankaracharya was responsible for this at all. Maybe many things he propagated, many things that he stood by were such that they appeared to be opposing Buddhism, but actually that was not the case. There's enough evidence which scholars have produced to demonstrate that this was not the case. I have dealt with this in great detail in my book, and I have quoted several texts. So my personal view is no. Adi Shankaracharya was perhaps one factor. There were many other reasons.
Did Greek philosophy influence Indian darshanas?
Of course it did, in more ways than one. When the Greeks arrived, they found ascetics. There's a famous case which has been narrated in many texts. His soldiers found naked ascetics, a group of them, among the trees. And then they approached those ascetics and they tried to find out what is their ideology. Now, Greeks, when Alexander came, he was not like ordinary invaders. In his troop, entourage, if I may use that word, there were philosophers, there were scientists, there were geographers, and there were obviously the soldiers. Alexander himself was a student in the academy, as we all know, of Aristotle when he was very young, perhaps 12. So he had very inquisitive mind. Apart from being a brilliant general, he was extremely well-read and well-informed individual. So, when they came, they engaged with Indians because they wanted to know what is the ideology of Indians, what philosophy we have, what culture, the civilization. So they were very keen observers and they wanted to learn about it. It resulted in a lot of interaction. And as a consequence of that interaction, Indians learned about Greek thoughts and Greek philosophy, and the Greeks learned about Indian ideologies, Indian thoughts. So it was a very interesting exchange which continued for a few centuries, because once Alexander returned, he left his viceroys, and eventually, of course, the Bactrian kingdom was formed. Some of the Bactrian rulers were so impressed by some of Indian ideologies, they started adopting Hinduism. They became Vishnu Bhakt. They became followers of many Indian gods. So it was very intense and interesting cultural and religious and philosophical exchange.
Is it accurate to say Hinduism converts ideologies rather than people?
This is a very interesting way of putting this. This is the first time I am hearing this question. Very interesting question. When we use word convert, it implies the desire to use more than logic
Yes.
to change the other person's views. There's a hint of that always when we use the word conversion. More so because in present India, it is a very big issue. Words historically have changed their meanings. As the societies change, the words change meaning for different societies. Coming back to your original question, when you say Hindus converted people, or the Hindu ideology converted people, I would use the word Hindu, and it's a very vast word which encompasses so many ideologies. Hinduism has affected people, their ideologies, their way of thinking, their way of living, and their religion. So yes, so whenever any people or societies or civilizations have interacted with Hinduism, they've been very deeply affected. Yes.
Was Aryan a racial, cultural, or spiritual identity?
This is a highly controversial subject. Okay, so, and I have spent considerable time trying to understand it. The way I look at it is, the central issue here is when we use the word Aryan, what we mean by Aryans. Now, if we mean by Aryans a foreign tribe which came from outside what we think was India at that time, and that group came and conquered the local inhabitants, then it has the question has a different answer. But if we think like this, that there were no boundaries at that time, the idea of modern nation state as it exists now didn't exist then, obviously. So if there were no international boundaries, what defined an outsider transgressing in India? It's a very difficult question to answer. At least I have not been able to answer this. Now, if that is so, if we keep this thing in mind, that there were no boundaries and people could move freely from one geographical mass to another geographical mass, as they did in those days, then the DNA research of Dr. Reach and the team of 96 or 98 scientists 3 or 4 years back, they have done that. They published that 90-page paper on DNA, which covered Indian DNA, that clearly shows that many migrants came to India. And when they came, obviously, they were local inhabitants. And all the local inhabitants didn't follow the same practice. They were not alike. They didn't have same food practices. They didn't have same social habits. There were people from south who are addressed in Rig Veda and other as Dasa or Dasyu, and those other people who came from north. And when they met these people, they treated them obviously as different. Not to think that those dasas and dasyus were backward, uncultured, will be completely incorrect. There are instances of a Dasa king who owned 100 wooden forts, 100. So they were advanced. Now, these are the terms which perhaps we employ even today. For people who are not like us, we use terms which are not polite. What we call Negroes, we all know. So just like that, at that time there was this division. And one group which was following Vedic practices, they were identified as Aryans.
Okay.
Whether they migrated from within larger landmass of India or not, I don't know. But they definitely came, they settled down, and they kept migrating more and more towards north. Yes.
Caste and ritualism, the real reasons for the rise of Buddhism and Jainism?
I would say that caste and jati pratha, varna vyavastha, definitely was a contributing factor. But was it very important? I don't know. As we know, the founders of both these religions, Mahavir himself was a prince, so he came from a Kshatriya family. Gautam himself was a prince, as we know. Again, Kshatriya family. Both of them couldn't have suffered on account of varna vyavastha. As a matter of fact, they were beneficiaries. And they took to Buddhism or to Jainism in their youth. So, what triggered it? In case of Gautam Buddha, as we know, what triggered was his disappointment, the dukkha which he saw, the suffering, an old man's walk, a dead body being taken. These are things which are supposed to happen. So, this very, very far-fetched idea that this is what triggered it. There must be several triggers. This could have been one small factor, but not the factor.
So, what were maybe the 3 reasons that triggered the rise of both the religions, according to you?
In case of Buddhism, it was personal trauma, if I may use that word, that Gautama suffered on each of his outings, which is all was there for us to read in the textbooks. A dead body, an old man, a sick man. And every time he asked, what is this? Because he was protected. Being a prince, living in a palace, he didn't know the poverty, he didn't know the suffering. He was deprived. And when he saw it, he was taken aback. It happened. Even my granddaughter at times, when she sees a thing like this, she questions. She's hardly 4-year-old. And once, when we were going by car somewhere, and she saw some deprived children playing on the pavement and crying. We were at a crossing. She asked these questions. Why they are without their parents? Why nobody is looking out? So we can understand what triggered it. But it was the trigger the only reason? We all get triggered. There are several trigger points for all of us in everyday life. We don't change. He did. And that is why he is good Buddha. And that is why he is great. Because he had everything. And he was seeing what all of us see. And we are not affected. So why is Gautam Buddha, the God, the avatar? For this reason, for his sensitivity. And it doesn't end with sensitivity. He didn't stop there. He followed it himself by giving up everything, by meditating for several years, till he realized whatever he thought is the right course, the Madhyam Marg as it is called. Ditto with Mahavir Jain. I'm a great follower of both of them. I'm half Buddhist myself. I'm so impressed by that ideology. So I think there were multiple reasons why it happened. And they were great mind, yes.
How did Sanatan Dharma respond intellectually to Buddha's rejection of Vedic authority?
So, Sanatana Dharma is very good at dealing with these situations. And over thousands of years, it has handled these things with such finish. It is remarkable. I wish the other religions also took a leaf out of Sanatan Dharma. So, as some time back we were discussing, what happened is, it started accepting, intellectually accepting some of the key messages of Buddhism. That was one. At the same time, it started rebutting in debates. And that was a time when, unlike today on WhatsApp, when we become abusive and we don't agree with someone, those were the days. If two scholars didn't agree, they challenged their opponent for a public debate in which the general public came and watched the debate and heard the argument. And whosoever convinced the other person became his follower. So there was a sense of honesty. You and I are having a debate whether vegetarianism is good or not. I'm just giving you an example.
Yeah.
And if at the end of the debate, I'm able to convince you it is inconceivable that if you are a non-vegetarian, you would give it up. You would not. So debates have lost their meaning in present time. But at that time they were truly a debate where people believed in what they said. And depending on the outcome, they changed their thinking. So at that time what happened? Suddenly Gautam Buddha was faced on various fronts by various factions of Hinduism, by challenges.
That I can understand.
And Vedantists, they came up with this, that but Hinduism is also this. Ekam Satya. There is only one truth, the truth. They also came up with this, like you were talking about Shankar. And he came up with this concept of Brahman, which is pure, unalloyed consciousness, devoid of any form or any attributes. And when Buddhists were presented with this, they found themselves wanting.
Okay.
So this is how it happened. It's very interesting. So interesting. I mean, I wish one was an eyewitness to this. Anyway.
Were Indo-Greek rulers truly assimilated into Sanatan Dharma?
Largely, yes. Largely they were assimilated. They started issuing coins on which they called themselves Bhagavad Bhakt, and they were depicting Devi and depicting Vishnu and Bull, and so yes, they did.
Before the Arabs and British standardized the term Hindu, what did people call themselves?
$1 million question. So, different people at that time were following different ideologies. There were multiple ideologies, just as there are at present. And they called themselves those who followed Vedic practices. They called themselves followers of Buddhism. Those who called themselves Charvaks, this thing, ideology, they called them Charvakis. So they didn't call themselves by any one common name.
No specific.
But there was a common thread to all this. And that common thread was that we have to follow a righteous course in every walk of life. So that is what Sanatan Dharma is. But it would be wrong to assume that at that time they called themselves Sanatan Dharma. No. So prior to that, they identified themselves with whatever part of ideology they were following. Simple.
Understood. Has colonial categorization shaped modern Hindu identity more than ancient texts?
It is. It has. And not always in a good way. It's very unfortunate. the term Hindu, which we have almost completely accepted as our identity. There's a constant debate about Hindu, whether we are Hindu or Rashtra or our Dharma is Hindu or what is Dharma and Hindutva and Sanatan Dharma. The fact remains that the essence is lost. So much of confusion has been created. I have not found anyone in last 20 years whom I have asked this specific question. That are you Hindu? And naturally they say yes. And I say, and before this word was used, what were you? This is a very disturbing scene, yes.
Has social media distorted Hindu philosophy? What is your personal take?
Hugely. Beyond belief. Not only the social media, the books. A few minutes back here, I was talking to your publisher, going through some of these books that are lying here. I will not like to show because that will be a time. And I was going through. So, anyone and everyone has taken it unto himself to be an authority to explain what is yoga, what is mantra, what is Gita, what is Hanumanjali, and the meaning and interpretation and the etymology which they give, even about such holy scriptures as Ramayana and Mahabharata, or even our Quran. I find it very, very surprising. Instead of doing any service to this great religion, of which I am extremely proud, I think a disservice is being done. We must stop and think about what they are writing and what they are saying.
So to add to this, what are the 5 books you would recommend any, I would say, young audience to start with understanding Hinduism, maybe?
You have tied up my hands. I would have given a list of maybe 50 or 100. Anyway, I think every modern youth must read Gita. He must read Mahabharata. Ramayana is absolutely a must. And when I am talking about Ramayana, I'm not referring only to Ramcharitmanas by Tulsi, that great poet and scholar. But I'm also talking about Ramayana by Valmiki. Actually,
That
Ramayana
was your
written only-
first book that you actually read before writing.
And after this, if one can read Panchatantra, I think one has pretty well covered 90%. And it can be a tremendous beginning. Many people hearing this may object or may not be happy that I have kept Vedas out of it. But believe me, going through Vedas, and Veda is a term which covers several types of texts: Aranya, Brahman, Upanishad, and Samhita. These are all 4 groups of texts. And in each, there are several other books. It's a different thing. It's meant for scholars.
Okay. Do you think modern Hindus understand their own tradition?
Yes, they do understand their tradition, because the traditions keep changing, and that's the beauty of Hinduism. So what was there even 50 years back, in my lifetime I see a very vast change. And if we go back 500 years, perhaps it will be entirely different. Yes. So the answer is yes. They understand their traditions the way they are. But if your question is, do they understand what were traditions originally? Very few of them would know.
Okay. Why is the debate around Hinduism and Hindutva so intense in today's generation?
A simple answer would be that an effort is being made to give rise to what is called political Hinduism. And I am not using the word political Hinduism in a sense of criticism. I'm not attributing it to a particular party. All that I'm saying is, political parties, to meet their ends, are using Hinduism, and they are giving their own interpretations and understanding, and that is made a very large number of Hindus who believe that perhaps this is what our religion is, and that is what is happening. Hinduism, if you go by the etymology of the word, Hindutva and Hinduism would be an entirely different thing. It is like saying communist and communism, Hindu and Hinduism. But is that the sense in which it is being used in modern debate? No. And there are political debates that when we talk of Hindu, we are talking about Hindutva. Now, I have tried to have serious discussion in an attempt to understand what those people mean by it. They are not able to explain themselves. So I think this is being done very consciously to meet certain ends.
There's a very known Buddhist philosophy that desire is the root cause of all evil. So, what is your personal take on it? As they diluted their own philosophy in the after a few years or in the coming time.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. The biggest trigger which changed the course of life for Gautama was his encounters with situations where he saw suffering. And then when he started contemplating, he realized that the root cause of all suffering is desire. You want to look good, you want to look beautiful, you want to stay powerful, you want to have good body, you want to have all these things are temporary, and when they go away, then you suffer. So the desire is to accumulate more and more. And when there is a disappointment, then you suffer. So the problem is he, in the earlier stages, thought, and very rightly so, that the best way not to be disappointed is by not having any desire. If you don't have any desire, you will not be disappointed. If I don't have desire of having this cup of coffee, whether I get it or not doesn't matter. And he said, we must get rid of all desires. The problem, he also took it. Now, once you give up all desire, then how do you survive? So he said, you become a monk, a bhikshu. And how you live? How you meet your basic needs? By having those 3 or 4 possessions. One was that vastra, one was kamandal, one was those wooden slippers. And he said, apart from this, no worldly possession. Because there is no worldly possession, so nobody will take away anything, so there will be no disappointment. In real practice, when he said everybody should give up desire and become a monk, when you take it to extreme, try and visualize a society in which 90 people are monks. So how they'll survive? They'll survive by going and asking for bhiksha. But there'll be only 10% people left to give bhiksha to 90%. So when the ratio was reversed, when there were only 10% bhikshu, they could go and get bhiksha from 90. But if they are 90, they can't. And if it becomes 99%, then? So the whole idea of Buddhism, as it was conceived, was not a practical thing. And very quickly, the leaders, they realized, and they started moderating it. And the more they tried to moderate, the more it gave rise to new types of issues. This happens in most of the religions. Another thing very interesting was Hinsa. As we know, in Buddhism, any type of violence is prohibited by word or deed. Thinking of violence is as bad as committing that violence. So they said, don't indulge in any. And then they took it to an extreme. You cannot lead a normal life by not unknowingly stepping on an ant or killing a mosquito and things like this. So they kept taking things to extreme. And then there was, obviously, when we become like this, then suddenly you encounter the real problems. And then the leaders, they try to modify, dilute the original ideology, which is precisely what was done in all these cases also. They were made more practical. And when you try to modify things, the things don't always stay on course. So this is a very interesting aspect of how violence became a very difficult issue to deal with. I'll take 2 more minutes on this very interesting topic. Now, in those days, in order to propagate your ideology and have more people following you, that means joining Buddhist stream, it was very important to have the blessings of the ruler. It was very important to go and convince Raja, the king. If king didn't like somebody in his kingdom coming and propagating some other religion, you were barred. You couldn't enter there, that kingdom. Now, how could ever a king be convinced that give up all desires, give up all worldly things, give up all violence? The very existence of a king and kingdom was based on the philosophy of expansion, becoming more powerful, and if anyone attacked, by fighting and taking recourse to violence. So it was very difficult for a Buddhist leader to go to, say, for example, a ruler of some state in Kosal or whatever, and say, you become a Buddhist and you give up all desire, so you don't live in this palace, you give up all clothes, you become a monk, and give up your duty as a Kshatriya to defend this kingdom, let other people come and take it. So this was a practical difficulty. And then, to overcome this, they said, you must learn to win war without fighting it by becoming so powerful. And it's another story, it's a long story, this is given in the book. But what I'm saying, communists face the same problem in Russia and China. And they had to moderate their ideology. So ideologies had to be moderated. Pure idealism becomes very difficult with this. I must say here that Jains continued to follow their preachings, the preachings of their leaders, quite successfully. When they talk of, you must have read about it, Jain diamond dealers and others, when they become monk, they simply give up everything. And in a truck, I've seen that, in a truck, they carry the jewels and household things and they are simply throwing and giving it away. I greatly admire this. Now, these were some of the factors which were successfully dealt with. And eventually, because of that,
moderation.
Yes, get modified.
So again, it seems like even the ideologies were very subjective to people and the what was the situation at that moment.
Yes,
Buddhism has no founder, no single book, no mandatory doctrine. How did it survive 4,000 plus years?
because of this. Because it gives you individual freedom. Humans by nature like to have individual freedom. And from beginning, this great religion, if you can call it that, this great Dharma, it gave every individual the freedom that follow your path. And it said all of it leads to just that one. There could be 1,000 paths to reach that one goal. It realized. You must understand one thing. We are not talking about present day. We are talking about 5,000 years back, when most of Europe did not know how to cover themselves, when they did not know how to cook food and eat it. At that time, in this country, the sages were telling us, Ekam Sadhu Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. There's one truth, and wise men talk of 1,000 ways. I mean, every time I read this, I'm so deeply moved. 5,000 years back, to have this thinking, this liberality, it's amazing. And this is what makes me a very proud Hindu. This is what makes me a person who likes to know more and more and more about our past and our present. It's an amazing thing. Such total freedom. It is presented in no other religion. And I'm not saying to criticize other religion. I have great respect for them. All that I'm saying, here, thousands of years back, this freedom was given and was actually exercised.
We'll do a fun rapid fire kind of round. One word for Buddha.
Great soul.
One word for Shankara.
Incredible person.
Yajna or temple.
Both.
Dharma or religion.
Dharma, always.
Continuity or change.
Change.
In one line, is Hinduism a way of life?
Yes, largely.
So we'll start with Buddha. What was the biggest misconception about Hinduism that you yourself had before writing this book?
My biggest problem was the ritual. And that was because my parents, my father especially, who was a civil servant, he was very particular about puja. So it was fixed routine. In the morning, he would have bath and he would sit down and do puja. And very often we used to have katha, puja at home. So I always found, even at that early age, rituals not very attractive. I didn't at any point of time think, even when I was in BSc or engineering, that by sitting for puja or katha, one is becoming more dharmic.
Was there any discovery that completely surprised or shook you during research?
Oh, many. As a matter of fact, every day I am surprised, even now. And I think it is largely because of the fact that I'm such an ignorant person. That when I read, I find so much to know. And I'm talking specifically about Indology. So many things one keeps discovering every day. As I said, I like to read, and I read quite a lot, several hours a day. But every day I have surprises.
Do you think modern Indians misunderstand their own civilization roots?
Yes. In two ways, if I may add. Some who think it was much more greater than it actually was, and some who think, oh, there was nothing. Okay.
Why do you think school education largely ignores pre-Vedic civilization like Mehergarh?
Okay, my dear, here I like to correct you. I like to correct you in the sense that Mehergarh is a recent phenomenon. Mehergarh was discovered recently. It is part of more and more discoveries that are being made, archaeological discoveries, which relate to our Indus Valley period. But Indus Valley was taught to all of us in school. I remember in class 7th, perhaps, or 6th, we were taught about Indus Valley. So yes, it is taught. But Mehergarh and Rakhigarhi, they were not known at that time because they were not discovered. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were. So Mohenjo-daro and Harappa were taught.
How would you explain Sanatan Dharma to a 10-year-old today?
It's so simple to explain, even to a 100-year-old if he wants to. Sanatan Dharma is doing the righteous thing under all circumstances. So, if one is dealing with father, what is the dharma of the son? Putra dharma. When son is dealing with his son, when father is dealing with his son, what is his dharma? Pitra dharma. Now what it means? The righteous conduct. How the father should conduct himself. How the son should conduct. If I am dealing with my wife, Pati dharma. If my wife is dealing with her daughters, so on and so forth. So it is under all circumstances doing the righteous thing. It's as simple as this.
Why did you dedicate separate chapters to each Veda?
It's amazing that when I asked my friends, and my friends have been in touch for more than 50 years. We were in university together. We are in constant touch. So I started asking many of my friends, what are Vedas? You'll be surprised, 90% did not know what are Vedas. I would make it 99%. And all of them are perhaps better read than I am. So they had not bothered, they were not inquisitive enough to go and understand about this. But they were using this word every day, in everyday life. हमारे तो वेद में एक आ गया है. when someone tells me हमारे तो वेदों में कहा गया है, and if I ask which Ved, and I am not asking for page number or richa, I am saying, is it given in Ved or is it given in our Purana? Yes. So this is the problem.
You mentioned that for a very long time there were only 3 Vedas. Why is Atharva Veda controversial?
So what happened is, when I was conducting my research on this topic, much later I came across 2-3 old texts, and it is in Manusmriti also. There is a reference to Triveda, just 3 Veda, and at 1 or 2 other places. And then I started researching and trying to find more and more about it. And then the picture that emerged was that to begin with there were 3 Vedas, and much later, true to its character, Hinduism or our sages, our forefathers thought that those non-Vedic practices by those people who were not following Vedism, they should be accommodated. And if they were to be accommodated, it has to be a give and take. So they started accepting many of their traditions, many of their practices. Now Jadoo Tona is very essential part of all nomads. अब जो भी जनजातियां होती हैं, उनके अलग ट्रेडिशंस होते हैं. So these people got slowly accepting part of those, and many of those things were completely unacceptable. So those things were left. But those different ideas, when they were integrated into a Vedic Vidhi or Vedic system, so then there was a need to create another way. I think this is the explanation I have read at many places, and I entirely agree with it.
You describe a journey from action to knowledge, Veda to Vedanta. What does that transformation represent?
Oh, it represents a quantum jump in Sanatan Dharma. When a society from pure rituals starts thinking of the Creator in abstract terms, it's a very, very significant change. So, we started going to the root. Who has done all this? And if it is some superpower or some super being or whatever you may call it, what are its attributes? Is it like us? Did it take birth? Will it die? And then this debate started, which was an abstract metaphysical. And this is how the concept of Brahma emerged. But let me add here one thing very quickly. This didn't start with Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya himself has referred to many Vedantas who were born before him. So, that means this debate, this thinking was going on for many centuries before Shankara, in pre-Christ period.
What do you mean by the age of reason in Hindu thought?
I mean exactly what it says. Age of reason was when we started talking not about doing a yajna, offering oblations, जिसमें घी डाल के स्वाहा कहा. But when we started thinking about the larger purpose of the life, what this is all about, what is the beginning and what is the end, about the creation and our part in that, then suddenly we realize that the real purpose of life is moksha, merger of the self with that greater self. Now this has nothing to do with God. This has nothing to do with puja. It is an ultimate purpose of our existence. We are not asking for something. We are not saying I must have a beautiful new car. No. I am saying give me the knowledge, give me the wisdom to understand who am I, what is the purpose of my existence in this world, and what eventually I should seek beyond a nice house and wife and child and books. And so what is that greater purpose? So suddenly we are shifting from desire to something purely intellectual. We are taking recourse to reason. In offering oblation or stuti or praying with Hanuman Chalisa, we are not in any way trying to seek greater purpose of life. Here we are only praising the might of Lord Hanuman. So these are two different things. And this is, yes. So that is what it is about.
Have we diluted samskaras into symbolic rituals?
Indeed we have, largely. And that is for all of us to see. Now I'll give an example. When you go to a wedding, now Vivaha is very important sanskar. It's called Pani Grahana sanskar. Pani means hand. Pani Grahana, when you are accepting a hand. Pani Grahana sanskar. But it's one of the three most important sanskars. One is Antim sanskar, that is the end. One is Vivaha sanskar. And apart from this, the only other sanskar that most of us are familiar today, which every Hindu observes perhaps, is Namkarana sanskar, when a name is given to him. But for the obvious reason. So, largely we understand the purpose of these sanskars. Now, have you noticed in a wedding that 500 or 1,000 guests who are invited to attend the wedding, how many stay back to see that final ceremony?
Maybe just in a family.
So what is more important there? What precedes it? The cocktail party, the mehndi, the sangeet, that has taken central stage. The core where a man and a woman are taking 7 steps, saptapadi, and with each step holding each other's hand, they are taking a vow. That has receded in the background, is of no interest to us. As you rightly said, only the close family members sit there. The rest are gone. So what has more meaning for us? That answers your question.
Can someone be spiritual without rituals?
Of course. Spiritual. This is what Vedantism is all about. In Vedanta, there is no scope of any ritual. I mean, you can simply sit in a corner, shut your eyes, and start pondering over what is Brahman, what am I, what is this Maya, and there's no ritual involved in this. You need not do any ritual. You need not even go and sit in the corner. You could be lying in your bed early in the morning, just thinking about it. Yes.
Writing these books, what would it be?
Wonderful way of living this life, which is always doing the right thing for everyone around you, and even for those who are not around you.
Thank you.